Well, we're here in this recording, and Phil, really, I appreciate you being able to do the recording because so many people were looking forward to you being able to share this information about multifamily. So thanks for being on with us tonight.
Harlan, well, thank you for thinking of recording. It allows me to be at two places at one time. So, I'm glad we were able to do this. And, hopefully I can share some good information. And if any questions arise, that you get after this recording, Harlan, feel free to email me and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Why don't you get ready and go ahead and get ready to share the screen so you can be getting into your presentation. And I know I have some questions for you as we move through it as well. So go ahead and share.
Okay, feel free to ask questions as if you're a participant because I know you know all of this stuff, but your audience may be looking forward to hearing some of the answers. So let's see, share screen. All right. So here we go with the PowerPoint. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is stepping up into multifamily. And okay, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Haiti. I was born there and arrived in the US. My parents immigrated here when I was 3 years old. So my Creole is very limited because I didn't have to learn it as much. They immigrated to New York City, where I grew up and spent most of my life. I lived throughout the 5 boroughs between college and growing up and moving around. New York City is basically my home. And had a basic childhood as anybody else would have, and didn't think about what I was going to do till high school, as most people do. But one specific story I really remember is my English teacher, Miss Kelty. She had us do a report, as many teachers do when you come back from summer vacation. And the topic was, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I was thinking ahead and I was a little bit of a wise guy in high school. So I said, I don't want to be anything. I just want to have money. And she looked at me and she says, good luck with that. Well, somehow I turned that into real estate and don't do a whole lot now, but that was what that's always drove me. I went on to go to college and I majored in microbiology. I took a job with the city of New York, so I had a good government job with benefits. And I studied microbiology, and it wasn't long before I realized what my supervisor of 25 years was making $5,000 more than I was. And I said to myself, this is not going to be my path. So I watched an infomercial by Albert Lowry back in 1984 and immediately saw real estate as a way out of this microbiology job. I went to the weekend seminar, and that's all the information I had about real estate at this point. 6 months later, I closed on a 6-family, thinking that, boy, I did the right thing. I am the king. However, that didn't quite work out because, as I mentioned, all I knew about real estate was that weekend infomercial. So I say to the audience, be a consummate learner. That was my pitfall in the beginning. It's the kind of pitfall that could keep you out of this business permanently, and that would be sad. Fortunately for me, I didn't give up. And, although that first purchase was a very bad decision, I won't go into a long detail about it because we only have a short period of time tonight. So what next? So I bought this property in 85. And by the end of the year, I decided I was quitting my good government job with benefits because I was still on the track of making millions in real estate. Well, as I mentioned just momentarily, that did not work out. So I became a commercial real estate broker in the doggy dog, eat people alive, New York City commercial brokerage business. Um, that is a true blood sport. If anyone knows anything about commercial real estate in New York City. I stayed in that determined that I was going to make some money because all you needed was one good deal. And per year, an average commission on a sale in New York City back in the 80s was, close to 100 grand on an average property. So, you know, that was a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money now, but you just needed that one sale, which I could not do for 3 years. So I had to go back to work. Went back to a corporate job. I stayed there, climbed the corporate ladder, and did real estate at night. So I worked at day, nights and weekends, was fully dedicated to real estate. I bought single family properties and, kept at it until I finally had enough money. So enough about me. Let's talk about why would somebody want to go into multifamily real estate as opposed to single family or wholesale or all the other avenues that are available in real estate? And there are many. My recommendation to you, first and foremost, is find a niche in real estate that you enjoy and stay in that niche until you make some money. Even if it's not multifamily, whatever it is, find that niche. For me, it was multifamily, and let me tell you why. When you compare multifamily real estate against other types of real estate, you have these particular benefits, which I enjoy. One, you have the economy of scale. That means you can scale up from, a 5 family to a 10 family to a 20, 50, or 100 family property. Whereas if you have a single family house, you've got to buy another single family house, and you continue to do that. In multifamily real estate, the value of the real estate is determined by the appreciation that you can do. Now, in single family real estate, you cannot force appreciation. It is basically the value of the properties next door. So regardless of what kind of property you have, regardless of the care you take for it, you're generally going to be appraised at what the other properties nearby are worth. Multifamily is different. Multifamily is based on income. So if I can drive my income, I can have an identical property right next door where the income is lower than mine, and mine will be worth more than theirs by a measurable difference. So when I say forced appreciation, I can raise my rents, I can lower my expenses, and doing those two things and nothing else would increase the value of that property. Whereas you cannot do that in single family properties. You also get the benefit of accelerated depreciation. If your accountant and your team of financial people can move the acceleration from what is typically 27 years for a single family, you can do it in probably 5 in multifamily with accelerated depreciation. It's called dollar cost averaging. I mean, not dollar cost averaging, cost segregation, excuse me, and you can accelerate that depreciation. The other thing is vacancies. When you have a single family house or a 2 family house for that matter, when you have a vacancy, you have either a 100% no income or a 50% no income situation when you have a vacancy. When you have, let's say, a 10 family, for example, and you have a vacancy, you've only lost 10% of the income. So that's another reason why multifamily accelerates your wealth quicker, because you have less out of pocket from vacancies by having more units. You also have management efficiencies. Whereas if you had to manage 10 single family houses, you'd have to bounce around town to 10 different locations. If you have one 10 family property, you've got one location to deal with. So you've got that. And when you have multifamily, you can improve your tenant base. by getting rid of the bad tenants and improving, the overall property. When you have a single family property, if you've got a bad tenant for a year, you've got 100% bad tenants. Eventually you'll get rid of them, but you'll have 100% bad tenants, as opposed to if you had a 10 family, you might have one bad tenant. So again, you have 90% good tenants if you can do that. Also, the equity buildup goes back to the forced appreciation. You can build up equity much quicker in a multifamily than in a single family. So your path to wealth is a lot quicker. So let me talk about scale for a quick second. When I talk about scale, if you've got 10 single family houses, you may have 10 roof replacements, 10 HVAC replacements, 10 plumbing repairs, 10 insurance, riders. You got maintenance and taxes and advertising for each of those properties. However, if you have a 10 family house, for example, now you've got to divide those, you get to divide those expenses by the number of units. So in this case, if I had a roof to fix, yes, it's going to be more expensive than a single family roof, but it's one roof. And I have maybe one HVAC at a time, as opposed to losing all of my income that month because I had to replace the HVAC. And vacancy, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the bigger things. So if I have one vacancy, I still have 90% of my income. I can still pay my mortgage. I don't have to come out of pocket to make those expenses payments. So all of these things help you scale up with multifamily real estate. Now you want to understand the purchasing power, your purchasing power, because now you want to get into it. You're excited. This is a new avenue of real estate that you think you can go into and you believe you can make money. So you need to understand your purchasing power. In multifamily real estate, it's not your credit that garners that loan, although your credit does play a factor. It is the credit of the property per se. So one of the first things you want to do is run a financial statement on yourself, because net worth is an important factor in buying commercial real estate, multifamily real estate. A lot of times when you're about to purchase, they will ask you for your financial statement. So what a better time than now is Google financial statement, get one, and fill it out. See what your net worth is. You'll be surprised. It might be a lot higher than you may think, because real estate plays a very big role in your financial net worth. The next thing you may want to do is build your credit. Now, again, credit isn't the overriding factor like in single family properties, but it plays a role. So if you don't have good credit, build it up while we're thinking about going into multifamily real estate. Next thing you want to do is identify a market. And Harlan, I think you had some questions in this area that the audience may have asked. But when you're identifying a market, for the purpose of tonight, let's assume that you're just getting started in multifamily real estate. And to get yourself comfortable, I would strongly recommend finding a neighborhood that is in driving distance of where you live. And once you do that, you want to identify the size and type of the property. I won't go into very much detail about the classification system because it's something that is used in commercial real estate. They're graded from A through D. And basically what it is to make a short story out of it, an A-class property is something that the everyday Joe is not buying. A-class property pretty much means those glass towers you see downtown, those really high-end rentals, new construction, all of that falls into an A-class property. A B-class property tends to be a property that's probably younger than 20 years, has lots of amenities, but is not quite the most expensive rentals available. And then you have what is the bread and butter of this business, especially for guys like you and I, and that's C-class property. They're generally older, They're run-of-the-mill type properties. You'll see them everywhere. They're older properties, and not, and you have, your garbage man, your teacher, your, mailman. They live in those types of properties. The rents are generally a little lower. The amenities are usually not many, but that's the bread and butter of where you want to be. And then there's D-class properties, and those properties generally are in very bad neighborhoods, poorly maintained, and those are the areas I would stay out of if I'm going into this as a new investor. There's a lot of money to be made in those D-class areas, but you have to be experienced in handling that type of situation. Next thing you want to do is build a team. Okay, so making the assumption that you may not have any of your own money, you may want to have to get an investor or some partners in on the deal. Get yourself all the knowledge that you possibly can on the subject matter. There are a lot of resources. There are podcasts. There are groups to join as the one that you're on. Get to know other investors, and once you get that knowledge, you can put your foot in the door. The next thing is you want to get to know commercial real estate brokers. There's a difference between commercial and residential brokers. Commercial brokers usually have property listings that are 5 units or higher, and that is the definition between, commercial and non-commercial. 5 units or higher in residential is considered a commercial property. So you want to get to know the commercial brokers. They are very stingy with their listings. So when I say get to know them, you really got to get to know them to a point where you're on a first name basis when you call or when you email. And once you start to establish yourself with commercial brokers, they'll be more willing to give you the listings. You have to understand, from a commercial broker's point of view, they don't get as many listings as a residential broker. So when they have one, they want to get both sides of the commission. They want to get the listing commission and the selling commission. So therefore, to get the selling commission, they need to know that the buyer can perform. And they only give those listings out most often to buyers they know can perform. Property management companies. You can open up, Google and Google property management companies. There's an official association for property management companies where you can find them and get to know them, because generally they're one of the first people to know a property is for sale. So if you're looking to find properties for sale and you establish a relationship with property managers, they're more than likely going to know, hey, this guy's having a rough time managing this property. He's not happy with the returns, and he might be thinking about selling. So getting to know them is valuable to yourself in this business. Property inspectors. Now, if you're doing small multifamily, you're probably still going to use an inspector. Get to know a good one, a reliable one. If you're looking at bigger properties, you want to get to know a handful of different tradesmen. You want to get to know an electrician, a plumber, a roofer, paint contractor. Get to know these guys where they'll come out at no cost to you and give you estimates on certain things that need to be done to this property that you're looking to buy. So if you're looking to buy a property, normally if you buy a single family house, you go get, a 4-point inspection from a property inspector. However, when you're buying bigger multifamily, you start to not use inspectors as much. You're using contractors where you can say, hey, look, what's the age of the roof? And, what do you think the life I have on this roof? And they'll come in and give you an honest assessment, and you can factor those in to, capital improvements that you may need to make for that property. Mortgage brokers. When you're buying multifamily, just like any other, you're going to need some money, and a good mortgage broker can assist you in finding the right mortgage for you. In multifamily, there's basically over $1 million mortgage or under $1 million mortgage. The differences are huge. If you have under $1 million mortgage, you're probably going to be at a local community bank, credit union, those kinds of places. When you get up over $1 million, then you qualify for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and those types of loans. And that's a different animal. And so you need to know where you're going to be at, but you want to get to know mortgage brokers so they can assist you through that process. Also, you're going to need a good insurance broker naturally, because it's going to be something you'll need. And you'll also need a good attorney or title company. And all of these things are important in doing the math as well, because you need to know the expenses. You may need to call the mortgage broker. You need to call the mortgage broker to find out what kind of rate am I going to pay on this, because that factors into your analysis of the property. What kind of terms can I get on that mortgage? The insurance broker, what's it going to cost for 20 units worth of insurance? You need to factor that into your analysis. So all of these people are important parts of your team when you're going into multifamily. Now, here's the most important part of multifamily. It's the numbers. You need to get to know the math. You need to understand if this is going to be a profitable venture or not. And in multifamily, there's different sources of income, rental income being the bulk of your income, but something simple like adding a laundry to a property can change your income picture and the value of the property significantly. If you're fortunate enough to be on the corner of a main crossroad, you may have a billboard who's paying you X amount of dollars per month. That factors into the value of your property. So all of these things factor into the value of the property. Unlike single family home, the value of the property is the comparables. In multifamily, although we do have comparables, you also have income evaluation. So once you have all of that income figured out what it is, next thing you're going to do is you're going to subtract all the expenses. In multifamily, you're going to have a water bill, because more than likely there's only one meter that covers the property. More than likely, you're going to have common area power charges. So if you've got a hallway or the street lighting or whatever you may have as terms of power, that's on you. You're going to have garbage removal for these tenants. You're going to have lawn care for these tenants. And of course, you'll have taxes, insurance, maintenance, and repairs. And even though you may manage it yourself, I want to tell you one thing: when you're factoring the numbers, add a percentage for management, because when you sell it, the person who's buying it may not be managing it themselves. So that number should be factored into your return, because if you decide to sell it, that number is going to be part of the number. So once you've got the income, you've got all the expenses, now you're going to subtract the income from the expenses, and you're going to be left with what in this industry is called NOI. That stands for net operating income. That income does not include your mortgage. So NOI is the net operating income minus all expense, the gross income, that's typed wrong, the gross income minus expenses, not including the debt service or mortgage. Once you have the NOI, that's the golden number in this business. That golden number determines your value. And for the sake of this illustration, I'm going to say you've done the math now and you have $60,000 a year worth of NOI. That's what's left after you've got all the income and you minus all the expenses, not counting your mortgage payment. Once you do that, typically you can divide by what is called a cap rate. You're saying, what is a cap rate? The cap rate is what is determined in certain neighborhoods. Generally in Central Florida, it can fluctuate from 7.5 to 6.5 to maybe as low as 6. The lower the cap rate, the higher your value of the property. So for this illustration, I use 7.5%. And if the cap rate on this property were 7.5%, that property would be worth $800,000 if it had a net income of $60,000. Now, naturally, from that $60,000, you got to pay the mortgage. But the rest of the money is all yours. Now, any increases that you have in NOI and you divide that by a cap rate, increases the value. So let me do a quick one on the side here, Carlin. I didn't prepare for this, but I'm going to do it real quick and say, let's say that's a 10-unit property, right? And rent is $700 for all one bedrooms. And when I buy the property, the rent is $700. But I realized by doing my comparables of rentals in the area, the real rent should be somewhere in the neighborhood of $850. The owner has owned it for a while. He's never really bothered to increase the rent. So there's $150 that I can increase the rent, okay? So I take that $150 and multiply it by 10. That's $1,500 a month that and this isn't gonna happen overnight, folks. So just understand, people have leases, but over the course of 1 year, when those leases expire, I increase it $150, okay? So now I've got $1,500 per month at the end of year one increase per month. If I multiply that out by 12 months, 12 times 1,500 equals an increase in rent of $18,000, okay? So if I take that $18,000 and I divide it by 7.5%, I have increased the value of that $800,000 property by $240,000. Not bad, huh? Because if I decide at the end of year two, and I've able to increase that rent by that much, now I've got $240,000. I can sell it and make $240,000 and move on, or I just have additional cash flow in my pocket. So that's the value of multifamily real estate. It allows you to force that appreciation in a relatively short period of time, and you can increase the value by those numbers. Now, imagine increasing one property by $240,000 in 1 year. You can't do that in single family. So that's why multifamily is a valuable resource. Now, I don't want to give anyone the impression that you're going to find these properties every day, because if we did, I wouldn't be presenting this to you. I'd keep them for myself. But in all reality, you can find these properties. They're just like finding, a great deal anywhere else. But small increases in rental income or small decreases in expenses can yield a very large return on the property. Another case in point, I remember one of my first multifamilies, and I did some studying on it before I did it. I said to my management company, I want you to put a brick in every toilet tank in the building. It was a 16 family. And he's like, a brick, why? And I said, listen, a brick represents probably like a quart of water, okay? And if I reduce a quart of water by 3 flushes per day, which is the average in a one-bedroom apartment, I've saved that much water. At the end of the year, I think we saved like $2,000 on the water bill. So again, let's take that $2,000. $2,000 that I reduced my expenses by, I divide it by this 7.5 fictional cap rate. That increases my property by $26,000. Not bad for putting a couple of bricks in a toilet tank. Nowadays, we just buy, efficient things. So Harlan and the group, that's the end of what I have as far as a presentation. Feel free to ask me questions, so we can help the group with whatever.
Phil, thank you so much. I mean, that's just a basic look at multifamily from somebody that's done this for decades and shared that wealth with us. And Phil, one of the things I heard you say there was that the location is important for us if we're getting to this new. So find something close, and then find something that has the kind of tenants in it that you would like to have to be managing. Talk about that a bit more, why that's important.
Well, that's important for two reasons. When you're first getting started out, especially if you're buying a 10 family, there's really not enough money to have a management company and get a great return. And I imagine you want to get the most return you can. And 10 family is something you can manage yourself. Now imagine you've got 10 families and it's in another state and you got a problem. Okay. Imagine it's beyond you probably still have a day job. Tenant calls at noon. I've got an issue. You can't leave work. You got to go handle it. You got to call somebody. So geographical is important if you're just getting started out and you're going to manage it yourself. It's also important for the tenant base because you don't want to be in a neighborhood where you're uncomfortable collecting rent. Okay. Over the years, I've managed to do something that avoids me from going to those places. And, it's just technology. And I have my tenants, the smaller tenants, auto drafting. So all of their rent comes to me on the first. It just gets deducted from their bank account. And for me, that's a great situation. I don't have to go as frequently as in the past where you had to, knock on the door because the guy's 3 days late or whatever the case have you. What I find with the auto drafting that works for me is that more often than not, a tenant will call you if they're going to be late because they don't want the overdraft fee. So they'll say, hey, I'm going to be late. Can I move it by 2 days? Sure, no problem. You're going to pay the late fee if it's past the third, but no problem. So that's a good thing. But neighborhood is very important because not only it impacts the value of the property, it also impacts the care of the property itself.
Good. That makes a lot of sense. Very practical insights here that we're getting from Phil. How do we find these 10 unit, 8 unit, 4 unit, 16 unit ones? How do we find those? What do you recommend? You said a broker's a good piece. Are there other ways to find them?
Brokers are a good place, but brokers do exactly what you would do if you were canvassing the area, right? So they generally get to know the owners and they stay in touch with the owners. You need to do the same. You can do that. I'm sure the audience has probably done a little bit of real estate where they did mailings and, canvassing the neighborhood. So you can do the same thing with smaller multifamily. You got to get to know the owners. I would go into the property records and send out mailers to them, tell them you're buying in the neighborhood. Mailers will work up until, maybe 25 units. Then you got diminishing returns because when you got more than that, more than likely there's a management company in place and they chuck the mail. But if you can get a hold of the owner themselves, mailing is not a bad way. Looking at property records, again, getting to know management companies. And here's 2 websites. I don't know if you can put it in the chat or put it on the thing.
Okay.
I'll say it slowly for the audience to write down. So if you've got a pen, write these 2 websites down. One is called loopnet.com. Okay, that's LOOPNET.com. There's nothing but commercial property on there. And the other one is called Crexi. It's CREXI.com. And in Crexi, you can put your criteria, the neighborhood you're looking for, how many units you're looking for, and you can get a weekly or daily email depending on how many properties are available, and you'll get to know that. But let me tell you what's important about those 2 websites. Those listings are not always the best listings, okay? What those listings are good for is for you to practice your math, get to know brokers, because if they're listing on those sites, that means they do that. And if you can get to know those brokers, they'll give you the ones that they're not putting on the site. Because generally, if they put them on the site, it's because they don't have a buyer for that property, or it's not a great deal. The owner who's selling is not as negotiable. So it's not a sweetheart deal. Okay. But in multifamily, if you know what you're doing, you don't need a sweetheart deal. As I mentioned, maybe you can, lower the expenses, or maybe you can increase the rent, or maybe you have some skill set that allows you to do one of those two things that the previous management did not have. And you're willing to go in and make maybe a little less than a professional buyer, but you can get in and you will make some money.
Great insight. Two great websites there, not necessarily for finding properties, but for beginning to do your practice with the math and your analysis,
Absolutely.
and also to get to know brokers. Excellent with that. Why not start at 100 units if 10 units are good, Phil?
Well, if you don't mind, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just more zeros, right? And what stops people generally is fear, right? So fear is just false evidence which appears to be real. So, you can also, another analogy is you can forget everything and run, or you can, I forget the other half of that, but there's another half of that that represents fear. But starting with 100 units, probably not recommended, but if you can do it, there is a way of doing it. It's called syndication. And that's a whole nother all-day seminar.
Yes, it is.
But syndication mainly is raising money, getting enough money to make that down payment, and then sharing the proceeds with all the investors. That's a short nutshell of how you can buy.
Yep. So many people, it seems, start single family, move to small multi, and then maybe move up from there as they get confident, and then they can deal with their own internal fears and that as well. Another question here would be, and let me just make a note on Volusia County, since this is in West Volusia. The Volusia County appraiser site has excellent resources for identifying properties and for identifying multifamily properties and finding owners. And also you can go to Sunbiz then just to double check on the owner and make sure that that it's the owner right now, because I know Volusia County, sometimes their database of owner addresses is not totally up to date. But it's a good place to go in Volusia County. I don't know about other counties.
I can say this. I can say the same for Orange. I find Florida in particular is excellent with property appraisal websites.
Yep.
And those of you who have always been in Florida, you don't know how good you have it. I've worked around the country, and I can tell you in particular, like, you'd be surprised in the year 2020, like Newark, New Jersey is still all paper-based. You can't get anything on that.
Wow.
Okay. Whereas here in Florida, we can not only get the name of the owner, the address of the owner, what he paid for the property, what the previous sale was. In a place like Newark, New Jersey, you can't get any of that, without going to the courthouse. So we have it pretty good in Florida.
Yeah, as I would say, we're blessed here in Florida.
Right.
For sure. Another question here was managing it yourself versus property manager. What do you pay for a property manager these days, Phil?
Well, property management expenses are really dependent on the size of the property. If you have a 10 family, more than likely you're going to probably still pay in that neighborhood of 10%.
Okay.
You probably pay 10%, probably all the way up to maybe 50, 60 families. Then when you start getting up to 50, 60 and more, then the price comes down. So, the ones that I have that are that size, I'm paying 4%. And they make their money on having maintenance on site, and they make their money on other things. But, it's definitely worth it once you're in this business to have property management. If your property is making enough income where losing 10% doesn't hurt and you still make a profit, I strongly advise it, simply for peace of mind. Unless you just like doing that kind of thing, peace of mind. You don't have to think about the phone ringing on Saturday night at midnight. You know what I mean? You're out to dinner and, you know, God forbid, you know, a pipe bust, you know. These are the things you don't have to worry about when you have management on site.
Yep. And that's part of scaling. The problems get scaled too, don't they, in multifamily, Phil?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to pay attention to the manager. You know, make sure what they're doing is correct. But you know, that's your job, is managing the manager once you've got management in place.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about funding, and there are probably two sources of funding. One's out of your own pocket, and you've got to come up with some of that money anyway, either your own pocket or a partner. But then you talked about there is some commercial, there are loans out there, and you mentioned for under $1 million, it's probably a credit union in your neighborhood or a local bank in your neighborhood that's going to be making those loans. What's the best way to approach a banker in those?
Well, you're going to present them with what we call a pro forma, right? And a pro forma is, for the lack of a better term, a projection of what income and expenses you expect on this property. And you'll sit down with them and you'll tell them, listen, I'm looking to buy this property, and here's the pro forma and here's the rent roll. You need both. You need a 12-month rent roll, which in this business we call a T12. It's 12 months trailing of income and expenses, and you'll need the actual rent roll. So who's, you know, rent roll is John Smith, Jane Smith, Bobby Smith pays this much, and their lease is expired whenever that date is. And you bring those two pieces in to whomever the lender is, and they'll come up with a number. They have different evaluation methods to figure out what that property is worth and what they're willing to lend. And, you know, if you get that loan, you're in there.
Good. And I've found even you can go before you get a property and just talk to them and ask them, what are some of the criteria you need? What kind of terms do you do on properties? What do you need if I come in with a property here? I'm getting ready to get one. And they're really, at least the people I've talked to, have been very helpful. And it kind of sets my mind at ease that I have that information already ahead of time.
And it's an exceptional resource for someone who's new and fearful, because here's what's going to happen. If you walk in with that pro forma and that rent roll and it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to lend you the money. So they're going to prevent you from making that mistake of buying it too high. Yep. So that's a good resource, you know. So get to know local lenders if you're buying something where the mortgage is going to be under $1 million.
Yep. You mentioned that this is, I call it a relational business, that you have it's a team business when we do multifamily, perhaps more than those of us that do single family, although that's team as well. You got title companies and air conditioner repair people and all kinds of folks you got to know. But who are the key team players for somebody that's getting ready to get into multifamily that can get ahead of time before they even get a unit, as they're just looking and exploring it? Who should they start with?
I mean, naturally, you're going to have some relationships if you're looking to get into multifamily with the tradespeople, right? So most definitely form good relationships with the tradespeople, the electricians, the plumbers, the roofers, etc. These guys are going to be your eyes and ears when you go and look at a 10 family and be like, oh, you know, you got about 5 bad plumbing situations here. You really want to buy this, you know, or, you know, these things help. So you want to form those relationships. You know, if you probably have them already, but you want to have it at a greater extent when you're buying multifamily. And some of the other things that I mentioned in the presentation, you know, a good attorney or title company, you know, mortgage, etc.
Good. And then that, as you said, this is a little different than we're taught sometimes with creative buying single family, that a broker, a commercial broker is really something that many people use to get into multifamily, don't they?
They do. But here's another part which I did not mention. I don't know what our time is, but I didn't mention the fact that you're more likely to be able to get the owner of a 10 family to hold the paper, hold the mortgage.
So you can do creative.
Someone who owns a 10 family and they've managed it correctly, they've got a lot of equity sitting in that property, and they don't want to pay those capital gains. They just want the monthly payment. So they know how the property is performing already. They know how much income that property makes. And if you come to them correctly and you have the appropriate down payment, they're more than likely more willing to hold that paper.
Wow.
Yes. So, now you've got a mortgage that's not listed anywhere. You make a payment directly to the previous owner. He wins because he doesn't have to pay capital gains. You win because you don't got to sit in front of a banker and explain, why your child is, whatever,
Yes. Let me just ask you one last question and we'll get off. And again, thank you for making this time, even though our schedules didn't work out for you to do it live with us. The last question is, talk somebody out of going into multifamily.
Talk them out of it.
Yes.
Listen, this is what I'm going to say. I can't talk anyone out of it. That's the first thing. Reason I say that is if I were to talk to my 24-year-old self and say, self, this is what you need to do to be wealthy, multifamily would have been what I told my 24-year-old self. The only way that I would say multifamily is not for you is if, you just don't want to do that. You're happy doing whatever you're doing now. But for me, that was the source of my wealth. And when I look at my lifestyle and I look at the things I'm able to do, boy, this is it.
There you go. There are bear traps. There are problems. There are mistakes we make that cost.
As there are with everything, so no one get the impression that this is easy. It's not. It's hard work, but the payoff is huge. And you can get to a point where you have several multifamilies that produce very high income and you can spend your time on the beach.
Phil, thank you. Appreciate you making this time, sharing this with the folks that are on tonight. And again, if we get some questions, I'll get them back to you and we can get it back to our group with that too, your responses to that. Thank you. And
Very good.
Yep.
Thanks for having me on. And, again, if they have side questions, feel free to reach me. You know how to get me.
Yep, and the CFRI commercial group, if they're in CFRI, if you're not, it costs $10, but actually these days it's still on Zoom, but you got to be in CFRI to get on. But when is that meeting? And
my next meeting, I'm the group leader for the commercial multifamily group at CFRI, if you're a member. We meet the second Tuesday of every month. The next meeting is the Tuesday coming, and I'm going to be talking about goal setting. So if you're a member, I'm going to talk about goal setting because I'd like to see everyone listening have at least one multifamily by the end of 2021.
There you go. Phil, again, thanks. Blessings to
Thank
you.
you.
Happy holidays
Have
to
me
your
on.
family.
All right. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.